The judgment, the Galactic Confederation had existed for over 180,000 cycles, a monument to order and hierarchy that stretched across 47 galaxies. It was not built on cooperation or mutual respect. It was built on a simple principle that every civilization eventually learned. There were those who ruled, and there were those who obeyed. The architecture of power was visible in everything the Confederation did. At the summit stood the founders, five ancient species so old that their origins had dissolved into mythology. Below them were the protectorate species, civilizations that had earned the right to enforce Confederation law across the stars. Beneath those were the client worlds, species granted limited autonomy in exchange for resources and compliance. At the very bottom were the observed, newly contacted civilizations placed under surveillance until Confederation decided what to do with them. Humanity had been observed for 50 years. In 2087, a Confederation survey vessel had detected electromagnetic radiation from a small blue planet in an unremarkable corner of the Orion Arm. They catalogued the inhabitants as technologically primitive, politically fragmented, and biologically unremarkable. The species called themselves humans, and they were assigned observer status with a designation number that translated roughly to specimen 4721. For 5 decades, Earth existed in a state of controlled contact. Confederation technology trickled down in carefully measured doses. Human scientists were allowed to study alien materials under strict supervision. Trade was permitted but heavily regulated. Humanity could watch the galaxy turn, but they could not touch it, could not truly participate in it, could not claim any real voice in how it functioned. The current human ambassador to the Confederation was a woman named Elena Cross. She was 61 years old, which by Confederation standards made her practically a child. Most species in the Council measured their leaders' experience in centuries, sometimes millennia. Elena had sharp gray eyes, skin weathered by 6 decades of Earth's sun, and a diplomatic smile that she had perfected over 15 years of service. She had learned to endure insults delivered with clinical politeness. She had learned to sit in a grand assembly chamber and watch decisions made about humanity without humanity having any say in them. She had learned that the Confederation viewed her species the way a gardener views weeds, tolerated only because pulling them required effort. But Elena Cross had also learned something that the Confederation did not know she knew. She had learned that the entire system was fragile. The Confederation ruled through overwhelming force and the illusion of inevitability. But underneath that facade, cracks ran deep. Client species whispered about independence in private. Protectorate forces were stretched thin across too many sectors. The founders had grown complacent, so certain of their supremacy that they had stopped preparing for threats. Elena had seen it all because diplomats became invisible when powerful beings stopped considering them important. She had watched and listened and reported everything back to Earth through encrypted channels that the Confederation did not know existed. What she reported was always the same. The Confederation was strong, but it was not invincible. Humanity was not ready to challenge it openly. Not yet, but one day they would be. Until then, Elena smiled and nodded and played her role perfectly. The crisis began without warning. A Confederation trade convoy traveling through the Tau Ceti sector was destroyed. 17 vessels carrying rare isotopes and biological samples were reduced to debris in minutes. The attack was brutal and efficient, carried out by ships that vanished before Confederation patrol vessels could respond. When investigators analyzed the wreckage, they found evidence that pointed directly at humanity. Weapon signatures that matched theoretical human military designs. Communication fragments encrypted with protocols similar to Earth's military codes. Navigational data that traced back to trajectories originating from the Sol system. It was all fabricated. Every piece of evidence had been planted by operatives working for High Arbiter Valkor, the leader of the Confederation Council. Valkor was a Kishari, one of the founder species. His kind were tall and skeletal, with translucent skin that revealed the slow pulse of bioluminescent organs beneath. They lived for thousands of years and considered patience their greatest virtue. Balcor had been watching humanity for decades, and what he saw disturbed him. Humans learned too quickly. They adapted too easily. They asked too many questions and formed too many alliances with minor species. Population projections showed that within 200 years, humanity would be one of the most numerous species in Confederation space. Balcor believed in preventive action. He believed that problems were easier to solve before they grew large enough to threaten the established order. The fabricated attack gave him exactly what he needed. Justification. The Confederation Council convened in the Grand Assembly Chamber on Nexus Prime, the capital world that had served as the seat of galactic government for longer than most civilizations had existed. The chamber was enormous, a vast circular arena with seating for representatives from over 3,000 species. At the center, elevated above everyone else, sat the 5 founders on thrones that seemed to be carved from solidified starlight. Elena Cross sat in humanity's small seat near the back, a position that reflected their status perfectly. She watched as Valcor presented his evidence to the council. He spoke with calm authority, describing the attack, showing holographic reconstructions of the destroyed ships, displaying the planted evidence that implicated Earth. His speech was masterful in its simplicity. He did not call for war. He did not use inflammatory language. He simply presented facts as he called them, and allowed the council to reach the obvious conclusion. The vote on Resolution 7 Omega took less than an hour. Of the 3,000 species represented, 2,847 voted in favor. Only 34 voted against, mostly minor species that had quietly befriended humanity over the decades. The rest abstained, which in Confederation politics was the same as approval. Resolution 7 Omega authorized a purification action against Earth. The language was clinical and bureaucratic, designed to make mass killing sound like administrative necessity. The resolution specified acceptable casualty ranges, designated target categories, and established rules of engagement that were really just formalities. This was not war. War implied 2 sides with relatively equal power. This was correction, discipline, a reminder to every species in the galaxy about what happened when you stepped beyond your designated place. Elena. Cross stood before the vote was finalized. The chamber fell silent, not because anyone cared what she had to say, but because her audacity was mildly interesting. She looked across the vast room, her eyes moving from the founders on their thrones to the protectorate representatives in their elevated seats to the mass of delegates stretching out in concentric circles. She spoke clearly, her voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. You are making a mistake. Humanity has committed no crime. Your evidence is false, and you know it. This resolution is not justice. It is murder, and you will regret it. The chamber remained silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then someone laughed. The laughter spread like a virus. Within moments, thousands of beings were laughing at the human woman who thought her words mattered, who believed her tiny voice could change anything in a galaxy, where her species was nothing more than an entry in a database. Elena did not flinch. She stood there and let them laugh, her face calm, her eyes steady. When the laughter finally died down, she walked out of the chamber without another word. In the corridor outside, she activated a communication device concealed in her sleeve. The signal was encrypted with quantum encoding that the Confederation's best technicians had failed to crack in 50 years of trying. Her message reached Earth in seconds, transmitted through a network of hidden relay stations that humanity had built without the Confederation's knowledge. The message contained 4 words. They chose this. Prepare. 12 light years away, deep beneath the Gobi Desert, in a facility that officially did not exist, the message was received. General Marcus Webb stood in a command center surrounded by holographic displays showing the Sol system and beyond. Around him, the leadership of the Unified Earth Command exchanged looks that carried the weight of 3 decades of secret preparation. Webb was 58, a career military officer who had devoted the last 20 years of his life to a single purpose, making sure that if this day ever came, humanity would be ready. He pressed a button on his console. Across the solar system, encrypted signals reached hundreds of locations. On the far side of the moon, massive hangar doors built into the regolith began to open for the first time. In the asteroid belt, among billions of rocks, shipyards that had operated in complete silence powered up their systems. On Titan, beneath kilometers of frozen methane, manufacturing facilities accelerated production schedules. In the Kuiper belt, weapons platforms that had been dormant for years came online. The Shadow Fleet was waking up. For 30 years, while humanity had played the role of compliant observers, while Elena Cross had smiled and endured insults in the Confederation Council, Earth had been building in secret. Every piece of alien technology that passed through human hands had been studied, reverse-engineered, and improved. Human engineers had taken Confederation designs and asked dangerous questions. What if we made it faster? What if we made it more powerful? What if we removed the safety restrictions? The result was a fleet of 600 warships that the Confederation did not know existed. These were not copies of alien vessels. They were something new, something that combined Confederation technology with human innovation and human desperation. The ships were smaller than Confederation battlecruisers, but faster and more maneuverable. Their weapon systems used principles that Confederation scientists had dismissed as too unstable to weaponize. Their defensive systems operated on theories that challenged fundamental assumptions about shield technology. Every ship was crewed by volunteers who had trained for this moment, who had accepted that they might not survive what was coming, but had chosen to fight anyway. Admiral James Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, the flagship of the Shadow Fleet. He was 52, compact and muscular, with black hair cut military short and eyes that had seen too much loss. His parents had died in the Beijing incident 30 years ago, an early Confederation peacekeeping action that had killed 40,000 people to suppress what the Confederation called illegal technology development. Chun had joined the military the day after his parents' funeral. He had spent 3 decades preparing for the chance to make the Confederation understand that humanity was not prey. The Purification Fleet arrived at Earth 72 hours after the Council vote. It was a force of 900 warships, led by Fleet Commander Draxus of the Xeon Collective, a protectorate species known for their military efficiency. Draxus was a towering figure, 3 meters tall, with armored chitin covering his body and compound eyes that processed tactical information faster than most species could think. He had conducted 23 purification actions in his career. He considered them unfortunate necessities, the surgical removal of problems before they metastasized. He expected this operation to be routine. His fleet arranged itself in a standard purification formation around Earth, a globe of warships positioned to provide maximum coverage of the planet's surface. The fleet broadcast its message on every frequency that human communication systems could receive. The message was simple and final. By authority of Confederation Resolution 7 Omega, the species designated human is subject to purification action. Designated population reduction, 1.2 billion. Target categories: major urban centers, industrial facilities, military installations. This action commences in 30 standard minutes. Compliance is not requested. Resistance is futile. Across Earth, 11 billion people heard that message. In homes and offices and schools and hospitals, on every continent, in every language, the translation was the same. The Confederation was going to kill 1.2 billion human beings, and they were going to do it while the galaxy watched. Because that was the other element of Resolution 7 Omega, the entire purification. Action was being broadcast live on the Galactic Network, the communication system that connected every civilized world. Trillions of beings across thousands of star systems would watch Earth burn in real time. The Confederation wanted everyone to see this. It wanted every observer species, every client world, every civilization that had ever considered stepping out of line to understand exactly what happened when you challenged the established order, the first Strikes hit exactly 30 minutes after the warning ended. Relativistic kinetic impactors. Simple but devastating weapons. Metal rods accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. When they hit, they released energy equivalent to nuclear weapons. The first target was Lagos, a city of 24 million people on the West African coast. The impactor struck at 3:17 a.m. local time. The explosion was visible from orbit, a flash of light followed by an expanding shockwave that flattened everything within 40 kilometers. 24 million lives ended in seconds, transformed into heat and light and ash. The strikes continued with mechanical precision. Sao Paulo, Jakarta, Mumbai, Cairo, Mexico City, Shanghai, New York, Tokyo. The purification fleet worked through its target list with the efficiency of a machine designed for one purpose. Each strike was calculated to maximize casualties while minimizing resource expenditure. There was no malice in it, no hatred. Just cold mathematics applied to the systematic murder of over 1 billion sapient beings. The galaxy watched. On Nexus Prime, in the Grand Assembly Chamber that was now mostly empty, the remaining delegates watched the broadcast on massive holographic displays. Some species watched with approval, nodding at the efficiency of the operation. Some watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. A few species sent their delegates out of the chamber, unable to witness what their votes had enabled. But most simply watched, passive observers to an atrocity that was being committed with their explicit permission. On a trading hub called Merchant's Rest, thousands of beings paused their transactions to watch cities vanish in bursts of light. In universities across the Confederation, students watched as case studies in the application of force. On military stations, officers took notes on tactics and casualty ratios. The bombardment continued for 8 hours. 8 hours to kill 1.2 billion people. To erase entire cities from existence. To scar a planet so deeply that the wounds would be visible for generations. When it was over, Earth was wrapped in smoke and dust. Fires burned across 4 continents. The oceans near the impact sites churned with displaced water and debris. Electromagnetic interference scrambled most remaining communications. From orbit, the planet that had been bright blue and green now looked muted, dimmed, wounded in ways that went beyond the physical. Fleet Commander Draxus reviewed the results with professional satisfaction. Casualties were within the authorized range. Target destruction was 97% complete. Ammunition expenditure was below projections. The operation had been executed flawlessly. He prepared his report to the Confederation Council, noting that the purification action had been completed successfully, and that humanity would now surely submit to full Confederation authority. He ordered his fleet to pull back to a holding position near Mars orbit and broadcasted a final message to Earth. Purification action complete. The species designated human will submit unconditional surrender to Confederation authority within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in additional corrective measures, including complete planetary sterilization. Then the fleet waited for Earth's surrender. But Earth said nothing. No transmission, no plea for mercy, no delegation sent to beg for terms. Just silence. Deep silence that stretched across hours and then days. The Confederation found this silence puzzling, but not concerning. They assumed humanity was simply too shattered to respond, too broken to form coherent thoughts. They had no idea that the silence was not the sound of defeat. It was the sound of 11 billion survivors making a choice. It was the sound of humanity deciding that some things were worse than death, and submission was one of them. It was the sound of Admiral James Chan activating the Shadow fleet and sending a simple order to 600 warships hidden across the solar system. The order was one word: now. The awakening, the 72 hours of silence from Earth confused the Confederation more than any response could have. Fleet Commander Draxus sat on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Order, and watched his sensor displays with growing unease. By now, there should have been frantic transmissions. Pleas for mercy. desperate attempts at negotiation. Every species that had ever faced purification action responded the same way: shock, grief, then surrender. But from Earth, nothing. Just electromagnetic static and the thermal signatures of fire still burning across the planet's surface. On the second day, Draxus sent a reconnaissance drone into Earth's inner orbital space. The drone was small, fast, equipped with advanced sensors designed to penetrate even the heaviest interference. It passed Mars, swept past the moon, angled toward Earth's atmosphere. 30 seconds later, it simply vanished. No explosion, no distress signal, no debris field. The drone's telemetry showed normal function until the moment it stopped transmitting, as if something had reached out and plucked it from existence. Draxus sent a second drone, then a third. Neither returned. He stared at the empty sensor screens and felt something he had not experienced in decades of military service: uncertainty. On Nexus Prime, High Arbiter Valkor received Draxus's reports with thinly concealed irritation. 3 drones lost was unusual but hardly alarming. He sent instructions to increase surveillance and prepare for the possibility that small pockets of human resistance might require additional suppression. What he did not do was consider that humanity might be capable of genuine retaliation. The idea was absurd. Earth was a observer-class civilization. They had no fleet, no orbital infrastructure worth mentioning, no technology that could threaten Confederation forces. The reconnaissance drones had probably malfunctioned due to electromagnetic interference from the bombardment. That was the rational explanation, and Valkor had not survived 4,000 years by entertaining irrational fears. He was wrong. While the Confederation debated drone malfunctions and compliance timelines, something unprecedented was happening across the Sol system. On the far side of Earth's moon, massive hangar doors built into ancient craters opened for the first time in 30 years. The construction had been disguised as geological surveys, mining operations, scientific research. The Confederation observers who had occasionally checked on these sites had seen exactly what humanity wanted them to see: small-scale operations, consistent with a developing civilization's cautious expansion. They had never looked deeper. They had never suspected that beneath the surface, humanity had carved out shipyards capable of building vessels that would dwarf anything in the Confederation's historical archives of observer-class civilizations. The ships that emerged from those lunar hangars were unlike anything the Confederation had cataloged. They were angular and aggressive, built with a design philosophy that prioritized function over form. Where Confederation vessels were elegant and streamlined, human warships looked brutal and purposeful. Their hulls were dark, treated with materials that absorbed sensor sweeps and made them difficult to track. Their weapon arrays were visible even to the naked eye, studding the surface like the spines of some deep-sea predator. These were ships designed by a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself and had learned painful lessons about what worked in combat. From the asteroid belt, more vessels appeared. Humanity had been mining the belt for decades, another activity the Confederation had monitored and dismissed as primitive resource gathering. What the Confederation had never detected were the hidden shipyards scattered among billions of rocks, facilities built inside hollowed-out asteroids where human engineers had worked in complete secrecy. These shipyards had produced destroyer-class vessels, fast attack craft, and something entirely new: missile frigates carrying weapons that operated on principles Confederation scientists had explored and abandoned as too dangerous to weaponize. On Titan, beneath kilometers of frozen methane and nitrogen ice, manufacturing complexes that officially produced industrial equipment powered up to full capacity. The Confederation knew about Titan's industrial base. What they did not know was that every facility on the moon had a hidden secondary function. While producing legitimate exports for the Confederation's regulated trade networks, these same facilities had been manufacturing components for humanity's secret fleet. Fighter craft began launching from concealed bays, rising through Titan's thick atmosphere in formations that spoke of extensive training and preparation. In the Kuiper Belt, where the Confederation's sensors rarely bothered to look. Weapons platforms that had masqueraded as research stations for 3 decades came fully online. These platforms were equipped with long-range railguns capable of accelerating projectiles to velocities that made Confederation kinetic weapons look primitive by comparison. More importantly, they were networked with targeting systems that gave humanity complete sensor coverage of the outer solar system. Nothing could enter or leave Sol without humanity knowing about it. Admiral James Chun stood on the bridge of the UESS Defiance and watched his tactical display populate with green icons as every element of the Shadow Fleet reported ready status. Around him, his bridge crew worked with focused intensity. These men and women had trained for this moment in simulators and war games and exercises that had been disguised as routine military drills. They had volunteered knowing that what they were preparing for might never happen or might happen and cost them everything. Now that the moment had arrived, Chun saw no fear on their faces. He saw anger, determination, and something that looked almost like relief. The waiting was over. The Shadow Fleet consisted of 600 warships organized into 12 battle groups. Each battle group was built around a core of heavy cruisers, supported by destroyers, frigates, and fighter carriers. The fleet was smaller than the Confederation's purification fleet, but Chen had never intended to fight a conventional engagement. Humanity had studied Confederation military doctrine for 50 years. They had analyzed every battle, every tactical decision, every strategic choice. They had identified patterns, weaknesses, assumptions that Confederation commanders made without even realizing they were making them. The Confederation fought like an organization that had not faced a peer opponent in millennia. They relied on overwhelming force applied predictably. They followed established procedures because those procedures had always worked. Chun's plan was built on exploiting that predictability. The Confederation expected surrender or futile resistance. They expected humanity to behave like every other observer-class species had behaved when faced with purification. What they did not expect was for humanity to strike first, strike hard, and strike with weapons that should not exist. On the third day of Earth's silence, Chun gave the order that changed everything. All battle groups, execute Protocol Nightfall. Show them what we built. The attack began at Neptune's orbit. The Confederation's purification fleet had positioned itself near Mars, close enough to Earth to respond to any surface activity, but far enough out to have tactical flexibility. What Draxus had not considered was that tactical flexibility worked both ways. Human warships that had been hiding in Neptune's shadow, using the planet's magnetic field to mask their signatures, suddenly accelerated to attack speed. The engagement happened so fast that Draxus barely had time to process what was occurring. His sensor officer shouted a warning about multiple contacts, high-speed approach vectors, unknown signatures, before Draxus could issue orders. The first human weapons hit his outer picket line. The weapons were not kinetic impactors or plasma charges, or any of the conventional systems the Confederation used. They were quantum displacement warheads, devices that human physicists had developed by taking an abandoned Confederation research project and asking the most dangerous question in science. What if we actually built this? The warheads created localized quantum field disruptions that effectively teleported explosive force directly into the target's interior structure. Confederation shields, designed to deflect or absorb external energy, did nothing against weapons that bypassed the concept of external entirely. The outer picket ships simply exploded from within, their hulls rupturing as warheads materialized inside. Reactor chambers and ammunition storage. Drax watched 12 of his ships die in the first 30 seconds. He started issuing orders, his tactical training overriding his shock. His fleet began maneuvering into defensive formations, bringing weapons online, launching fighters. But the humans were not giving him time to adapt. The second wave of human ships closed to engagement range and opened fire with weapons that Draxus's sensors identified as railguns. Nothing exotic, just mass accelerated to extreme velocities. Except these railguns fired projectiles at speeds 40% faster than theoretical maximums for that technology. The projectiles punched through Confederation shields and armor like they were not there. The third wave was worse. Human missile frigates unleashed swarms of self-guided munitions that moved with unnatural agility. Confederation point defense systems tried to intercept them and failed. The missiles dodged, weaved, operated with reaction times that suggested artificial intelligence far beyond what observer-class species should possess. When they hit, they did not simply explode. They released cascading electromagnetic pulses that shut down every system within a 100-meter radius. Confederation ships went dark in clusters. Their crews trapped inside disabled vessels while human warships closed in, and finished them with conventional weapons. Chun watched the engagement on his tactical display with grim satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to projections. The Confederation fleet was reacting exactly as human analysts had predicted, maneuvering into standard defensive formations, concentrating fire on human capital ships while ignoring the smaller vessels, trying to establish communications to demand surrender. They were fighting by their rules written for conflicts against opponents who did not understand modern warfare. Humanity understood modern warfare better than species that had not fought a real war in thousands of years. All battle groups advanced to Stage 2, Chun ordered. Execute dispersal pattern Omega. Make them chase ghosts. The human fleet suddenly scattered in 12 different directions, each battle group accelerating on seemingly random vectors. The Confederation fleet tried to pursue, but now they faced a new problem. Human ships were faster. Not by a small margin, but by 30% across the board. Every human vessel could outrun its Confederation equivalent, which meant that humanity could choose when and where to fight. Confederation commanders who tried to pursue found themselves lured into kill zones where massed human firepower waited in ambush. The battle lasted 54 minutes. When it was over, the Confederation's purification fleet had ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. Of the 900 warships that had bombarded Earth 3 days ago, 743 were destroyed or disabled. The survivors were scattered across Mars' orbit, some trying to flee, others drifting powerless, all of them broadcasting distress signals that no one was answering. Human losses were 23 ships destroyed, 47 damaged. The kill ratio was so lopsided that Chen's tactical staff had to verify the numbers twice before they believed them. Fleet. Commander Draxus sat in the ruins of his flagship's bridge, surrounded by emergency lighting and the groans of damaged hull plating. Half his crew was dead. His weapons were offline. His engines were operating at 12% capacity. Through his cracked view screen, he could see human warships moving through the debris field with predatory grace, finishing off disabled Confederation vessels that still showed weapon signatures. He had never been defeated before. In 23 purification actions across 4 decades of service, he had never lost a single engagement. The idea that he could lose, that the Confederation could lose, had not even existed in his operational framework. A communication channel opened on his console, one of the few systems still functioning. A human face appeared on his screen. Admiral James Chen looked directly at Draxus with eyes that held no triumph, no satisfaction, just cold purpose. "Fleet Commander Draxus," Chun said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. 3 days ago, you murdered 1.2 billion of my people. You broadcast it across the galaxy as entertainment. You did it because you believed we could not stop you, could not punish you, could not make you understand that our lives mattered. Chun paused. Behind him, Draxus could see the bridge of a human warship. Crew members working efficiently at stations that looked disturbingly sophisticated for an observer-class civilization. You were wrong, Chun continued. We are going to let you live. We are going to let all your survivors live. Not because we are merciful, but because we need you to deliver a message. Go back to Nexus Prime. Tell your High Arbiter. Tell your founders. Tell every species in the Confederation exactly what happened here. Tell them that humanity is coming. Tell them that every hand that approved Resolution 7 Omega will answer for what they did. Tell them that the age of purification actions is over. The communication cut off. Draxus sat in the darkness of his disabled ship and tried to process what had just happened. He had been allowed to live so he could be a messenger, so he could carry news of this defeat back to the Confederation. It was a calculated humiliation, and it was effective. Within an hour, Chen broadcast a message that went out on every frequency humanity could access. The message reached Nexus Prime, the Confederation's core worlds, the Protectorate territories, and thousands of observer and client civilizations. It was transmitted in 47 languages and broadcast with enough power that jamming it was impossible. The broadcast showed the debris field near Mars, thousands of destroyed Confederation warships tumbling through space. Then it showed Earth, scarred and wounded, but still there, still rotating, still alive. Then it showed the Shadow Fleet arrayed in perfect formation, 577 warships with weapons powered and ready. Admiral Chun appeared on screen against the backdrop of his fleet. 3 days ago, the Galactic Confederation killed 1.2 billion human beings and called it justice. The galaxy watched and did nothing. Some of you approved. Some of you looked away. None of you helped. Chun's expression did not change. We are humanity. For 50 years, we have been observed, monitored, controlled, and dismissed as irrelevant. Today, that ends. We did not ask for this war. We did not attack your convoy. We have harmed no one. But you chose to harm us, and now you will face the consequences of that choice. We are coming to Nexus Prime. We are coming for High Arbiter Valkor and every member of the Council who voted for our destruction. We are coming for justice, and we will not stop until we have it. The broadcast ended. Across the galaxy, trillions of beings sat in stunned silence. On Nexus Prime in the Grand Assembly Chamber, High Arbiter Valkor watched the recording 3 times before he fully absorbed what it meant. An observer-class civilization had just destroyed a purification fleet. An observer-class civilization had just declared war on the Confederation. An observer-class civilization had built a fleet in complete secrecy and demonstrated technological capabilities that should have been impossible. Valkor had lived for 4,000 years. He had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had witnessed rebellions and wars and conflicts that had reshaped sectors. But he had never seen anything like this, because this should not have been possible. He issued emergency orders. Every available Confederation fleet was to converge on Nexus Prime. The Protectorate species were to mobilize their militaries. Client worlds were to provide support vessels and resources. Defensive installations around the capital were to be activated and reinforced. The Confederation was going to meet this human threat with everything it had. And it was going to crush them so completely that no species would ever dare challenge Confederation authority again. But while Valkor issued his orders, something else was happening across Confederation space. The minor species, the client worlds, the civilizations that had lived under Confederation rule for thousands of years, had watched Chen's broadcast. They had seen the debris field. They had watched an observer-class species do what they had never dared to attempt. And some of them began to wonder, if humanity could do this, what else was possible? The first species to respond publicly was a civilization called the Korvathi, a client world that had served the Confederation for 6,000 years. Their representative stood before a planetary, broadcast, and declared that the Korvathi would no longer comply with Confederation resource quotas. It was a small act of defiance, barely meaningful in practical terms. But symbolically, it was everything. Within 24 hours, 17 more client worlds had declared various forms of limited non-compliance. Within 48 hours, 3 observer-class species announced they were forming a mutual defense pact without Confederation approval. The galaxy was fracturing. The Confederation, which had ruled for 180,000 cycles through the certainty of its power, suddenly faced something it had not encountered in living memory: doubt. And in the Sol system, Admiral Chen prepared his fleet for the next phase. The Shadow Fleet would advance to Nexus Prime, but they would not rush. They would move methodically, seizing Confederation relay stations along the way, liberating client worlds that asked for help, building a coalition of species who were willing to stand against the old order. Chan knew that humanity alone could not defeat the entire Confederation. But humanity did not need to fight alone. They just needed to prove that the Confederation could be fought. The chain was breaking. And across 1,000 worlds, beings who had lived in chains their entire lives were beginning to realize that freedom might actually be possible. The reckoning. The advance toward Nexus Prime took 47 days. Admiral Chen refused to rush. Humanity had waited 50 years under Confederation observation, had endured insults and restrictions and the constant weight of being considered inferior. They had spent 3 decades building the Shadow Fleet in secret, preparing for a war they hoped would never come. Now that it had come, Chen would not waste their sacrifice on reckless haste. Every move would be calculated. Every battle would serve a purpose beyond simple destruction. The goal was not just to defeat the Confederation militarily. The goal was to dismantle the entire system that had allowed the Confederation to commit atrocities with impunity. The first relay station fell on day 4. Relay Station Epsilon 7 was a massive structure that facilitated faster-than-light communication and travel across 12 sectors. It was defended by a garrison of 40 warships, a force that would have been overwhelming against any observer-class species. The garrison commander received a transmission from approaching human vessels and assumed it was a surrender offer. Instead, Admiral Chen informed him that he had 2 choices: stand down and allow human forces to secure the station, or resist and be destroyed. The commander chose to resist. The battle lasted 11 minutes. The garrison was annihilated. Not a single human ship was lost. Chen did not destroy the relay station. Instead, human engineers boarded it, disabled the Confederation access protocols, and reprogrammed the entire system using codes that Earth's cryptographers had cracked years ago. Within hours, Relay Station Epsilon 7 was broadcasting human messages across 12 sectors, and the Confederation could not shut it down without destroying their own infrastructure. The pattern repeated across the next 6 weeks. Human battle groups seized relay after relay, cutting Confederation space into isolated pockets. High Arbiter Valkor watched his empire fragment in real time as communication. Networks went dark and fleet coordination became impossible. He had called for reinforcements from every protectorate species, had ordered every available warship to converge on Nexus Prime, but half those ships never received the orders. Because humanity controlled the relays, on day 17, something unexpected happened. The Korvathi, the client species that had first declared non-compliance, sent a delegation to meet with human forces near the recently captured relay station. Delta 9. The representative was an elderly female named Sira Koth, a scientist who had spent her life studying Confederation technology, while secretly hoping someone would challenge the system. She came aboard the UESS Defiance and met with Admiral Chun in his ready room. Sira was small, barely reaching Chun's chest, with iridescent scales and large eyes that had seen too many years of subjugation. She spoke carefully, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that could doom her entire species. Admiral Chun, my people have watched what humanity is doing. We have seen you fight and win. We have seen you seize Confederation infrastructure and use it against them. For 6,000 years, we have served the Confederation because we believed resistance was impossible. You have shown us that we were wrong. She paused, gathering courage. The Korvathi have ships. Not many, and not as advanced as yours, but we have them. We wish to join your fleet. We wish to fight for the future you are trying to build. Chan studied her for a long moment. He had expected this, hoped to break even, but the reality was more complex than theory. Accepting alien allies meant taking responsibility for their safety. It meant that if this war went badly, humanity would have the blood of other species on its hands. But it also meant that this could become something larger than human vengeance. Can you speak for your government? Chan asked. Sarah nodded. Our planetary council authorized me to make this offer. If you accept, we will commit everything we have. Chen stood and extended his hand, a human gesture that Sierra had learned during decades of studying Earth. Then we accept. Welcome to the Liberation Fleet. The announcement went out on every relay station humanity controlled. The Korathi had joined humanity's war against the Confederation. The response was immediate. Within 72 hours, 9 more client species had sent delegations requesting to join. The Thalani brought medical ships and logistical support. The Rakthi contributed fast courier vessels. The Morphians provided intelligence networks that had been secretly monitoring Confederation movements for decades. Each species brought what they could, and together they transformed the Shadow Fleet into something unprecedented in galactic history. A coalition of the weak and the oppressed united against the powerful Dot by day 30. The Liberation Fleet numbered over 1,400 vessels. Most were not warships in the traditional sense. Many were converted cargo haulers, civilian transports fitted with weapons, mining vessels repurposed for combat. But they represented something that terrified the Confederation more than any number of battle cruisers. They represented the idea that the established order could be challenged, that client species did not have to accept their designated place in the hierarchy, that the Confederation's power was not inevitable. High Arbiter Valcor watched the coalition grow and felt something he had not experienced in millennia, genuine fear. Not fear for his own safety, but fear for the survival of the system he had devoted his long life to maintaining. The Liberation Fleet reached Nexus Prime on day 47. The Confederation had assembled the largest defensive force in its history to protect the capital world. Over 4,000 warships from 17 Protectorate species formed a layered defensive perimeter around the planet. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons. Fighter squadrons numbering in the tens of thousands stood ready. Ground-based artillery capable of firing into low orbit was positioned around every major city. The Confederation had pulled forces from across the galaxy, leaving entire sectors undermanned. To create this impenetrable wall around their seat of power, Admiral Chen studied the tactical displays and saw exactly what the Confederation had done. They had concentrated their forces in a fixed defensive position, abandoning the mobility and flexibility that had been their historical advantages. They were fighting the way they had always fought, with overwhelming numbers applied to predictable strategies. Chun smiled without humor. They still don't understand what they're facing. Prepare for Operation Cascade. The battle began not with a frontal assault, but with information warfare. Human cyber warfare specialists, supported by Morphian intelligence agents who had spent decades infiltrating Confederation networks, launched coordinated attacks against the defensive fleet's communication systems. They did not try to shut down the networks entirely, which would have triggered automatic failsafes. Instead, they introduced subtle delays and corruptions into command transmissions. Orders arrived 3 seconds late. Tactical data was duplicated or misdirected. Coordination between different Protectorate fleets began to degrade as their systems fed them slightly incorrect information about friendly positions. The effect was small but cumulative. A defense that relied on precise coordination began to lose synchronization. Then the human warships struck. They did not attack the main defensive lines. Instead, they targeted the orbital platforms using long-range weapons fired from beyond the Confederation's effective engagement range. Human railguns, with their superior velocity and targeting systems, could hit targets that Confederation weapons could not reach. The platforms began exploding one by one, their debris falling into Nexus Prime's atmosphere like burning stars. The Confederation fleet moved to intercept, exactly as Chen had predicted. They left their defensive positions to pursue the human attackers. That was when the rest of the Liberation fleet revealed itself. Over 800 allied vessels, mostly lighter craft the Confederation had dismissed as militarily irrelevant, swarmed into the gaps left by the pursuing warships. They used tactics that Confederation doctrine did not account for, kamikaze runs by unmanned drones, mines deployed in unexpected vectors, coordinated strikes by dozens of small vessels against single large targets. The Corvathi proved especially effective, their small attack ships darting through Confederation formations and targeting sensor arrays and communication nodes. The battle devolved into chaos. The Confederation's numerical advantage became meaningless when their forces could not coordinate effectively. Fleet commanders issued conflicting orders. Protectorate species that had never fully trusted each other began prioritizing their own survival over mutual support. The careful defensive strategy collapsed into hundreds of individual ship-to-ship engagements scattered across orbital space. Chun watched it unfold exactly as human strategists had wargamed it. The Confederation had spent 180,000 cycles fighting weak opponents and internal conflicts between client species. They had optimized their military for suppression and intimidation. They had never developed doctrine for fighting a peer opponent who understood their weaknesses. The human fleet exploited every vulnerability. Quantum displacement warheads continued to bypass Confederation shields. Electromagnetic pulse missiles shut down clusters of enemy ships. Human fighters, piloted by men and women who had lost family in the bombardment, flew with a ferocity that horrified Confederation crews who had never faced opponents willing to die for victory. The Allied vessels provided support, screening human capital ships and overwhelming Confederation defenses through sheer numbers. After 9 hours of combat, the Confederation fleet broke. It did not surrender in any organized fashion. Individual ships and small formations simply withdrew, jumping to faster-than-light speeds and fleeing to other systems. The Protectorate commanders had not lost faith in the Confederation's cause, but they had lost faith in this battle. Better to preserve their forces for future defense than die protecting a capital that might already be lost by the time Nexus Prime's sun set on the battlefield. Over half the Confederation's defensive fleet was destroyed or had fled. The Liberation Fleet held orbital superiority around the capital world for the first time in galactic history. Chun stood on his bridge and looked at the planet below, a world of gleaming cities and ancient architecture that had been the center of galactic government longer than human civilization had existed. He opened a communication channel that broadcast to the entire planet. People of Nexus Prime, this is Admiral James Chun of the United Earth Command. We have not come to destroy your world. We have not come for conquest or occupation. We have come for justice. The planetary defense forces did not fire. The ground-based artillery remained silent. The billions of beings on Nexus Prime watched their orbital displays and understood that if the humans had wanted to bombard the planet the way the Confederation had bombarded Earth, there was nothing that could stop them now. But the bombardment did not come. Instead, human landing craft descended to the surface, carrying soldiers in dark armor toward the Grand Assembly Chamber. The Confederation's ground forces could have resisted, could have turned Nexus Prime into an urban battleground. But they did not. The order came from High Arbiter Valkor himself. Stand down and allow the humans to enter. Elena. Cross stepped off a landing craft onto Nexus Prime soil, wearing the same diplomatic uniform she had worn in the Grand Assembly Chamber for 15 years. Behind her walked Admiral Cheen and a security detachment of 20 soldiers. Ahead of her stood the Grand Assembly Chamber, the seat of power for the oldest governmental institution in the galaxy. She walked through corridors she had walked 1,000 times before, past meeting rooms where she had smiled and endured condescension, past galleries where she had watched her species being discussed like livestock. Nothing had physically changed. Everything had fundamentally changed. The Grand Assembly Chamber was not empty. The 5 founders sat on their thrones, ancient beings whose collective age exceeded 20,000 years. Most of the Protectorate representatives had fled, but a few remained, whether from courage or inability to process what was happening. And in the center, elevated above everyone else, sat High Arbiter Valkor. He looked old in a way that went beyond his physical age. His bioluminescent organs pulsed slowly beneath translucent skin. His eyes, which had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, watched Elena cross approach with something that might have been Resignation. Elena stopped in the exact center of the chamber. The same spot where she had stood when she warned them not to attack Earth. The irony was not lost on anyone present. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the vast space. High Arbiter Valcor, members of the Council, 50 years ago, humanity entered this chamber as observers. We came in peace, seeking knowledge and cooperation. We followed your rules. We accepted our place in your hierarchy. We caused no harm and threatened no one. She paused, letting the words settle. 3 months ago, you fabricated evidence of a crime humanity did not commit. You voted to purge 1.2 billion of us as a lesson to the galaxy. You broadcast our deaths as entertainment. And when I stood in this chamber and warned you not to make that choice, you laughed. The silence was absolute. We did not come here for revenge. Revenge would have been easy. We could have done to Nexus Prime what you did to Earth. We could have turned your cities to ash and your population to statistics. But we are not you. We will not become you. Elena produced a data tablet from her uniform. The Galactic Confederation is hereby dissolved. The hierarchical caste system that has ranked species by age and power for 180,000 cycles is abolished. In its place, we propose the Galactic Assembly, a governing body where every species, from the oldest to the youngest, holds an equal seat and an equal voice. No more tears. No more client worlds. No more purification actions. No more atrocities justified by bureaucratic language. She looked directly at Valcor. You and every council member who voted for Resolution 7 Omega will face trial before a tribunal composed of representatives from species across the galaxy. If found guilty, your sentence will not be death. Your sentence will be witness. Valcor spoke for the first time, his voice thin and ancient. Witness to what? Elena's expression did not change. You will be taken to Earth. You will walk through the ruins of Mumbai and Lagos and Snow Hollow. You will visit the mass grave sites. You will meet with survivors, with orphans, with the people whose families you murdered. You will carry that weight for the rest of your very long lives. And when beings ask you why the Confederation fell, you will tell them the truth. It fell because it forgot that every life matters, regardless of age or power or designated tier. The trial took 3 months. The tribunal included representatives from 200 species, a mixture of former protectorate worlds, client civilizations, and newly contacted observer class species. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy. Beings on thousands of worlds watched as High Arbiter Valcor and 43. Council members were confronted with evidence of their actions. The fabricated attack on the convoy. The predetermined decision to authorize purification. The casualty projections presented as acceptable losses. The live broadcast of Earth's bombardment marketed as educational content. The verdicts were unanimous. Guilty of crimes against sapient life. Guilty of abuse of power. Guilty of premeditated genocide. The founders could have executed them. Many species called for it. But Elena Cross stood before the tribunal and argued for the sentence of witness instead. Death would be mercy. Death would let them escape the consequences of what they did. Let them live. Let them see the galaxy they tried to suppress flourish without them. Let them carry the faces of our dead until their very long lives finally end. The tribunal agreed. Valcor and the other convicted council members were taken to Earth. They walked through ruins that were being slowly rebuilt. They stood in memorial fields where 1.2 billion lights burned eternally. They met with survivors who told them stories of the families they had lost, the futures that had been stolen, the holes in the world that would never be filled. Some of the convicted broke down. Some maintained their composure through sheer force of ancient pride. But all of them changed. When they returned from Earth, they were no longer the architects of an empire. They were living reminders of what happens when power is exercised without accountability. The Galactic Assembly, convened for the first time in the same chamber where the Confederation Council had ruled. But the thrones were gone. In their place were simple seats arranged in concentric circles, each one identical, each one representing a species with an equal voice. The first session was chaotic. Species that had never governed themselves argued passionately about trade agreements. Former client worlds demanded reparations. Protectorate species tried to maintain influence through procedural maneuvering. There were shouting matches. There were walkouts. There were compromises that satisfied no one completely. It was messy and inefficient and frustrating. It was also the fairest system the galaxy had ever known. Elena Cross served as the first human speaker of the Assembly, elected by a narrow majority after 17 rounds of voting. On her first day, she stood before representatives from across the galaxy and said simply, "We have a lot of work to do. Let's begin." On Earth, the rebuilding continued. Cities rose from the ruins, different from what had been lost, but alive and functional. The population would never fully recover. The scars would never completely heal. But humanity endured, as it always had, by moving forward while carrying the weight of its past. 10 years after the fall of the Confederation, a new saying began spreading across the galaxy. It started among the younger species, the ones who had lived under Confederation rule and remembered what it felt like to be powerless. But it spread to the mid-tier worlds and eventually even to the former Protectorate species. The saying was simple, it was translated into thousands of languages, but the meaning was always the same. Never mistake human patience for human weakness. Admiral James Chen retired from military service and returned to Earth. He visited the memorial field in what had once been Mumbai, where his parents' names were inscribed among billions of others. He stood there as the sun set and the lights began to glow. Someone approached him from behind, a young woman wearing the uniform of the new Earth Defense Force. "Admiral Ching, I wanted to thank you. My grandmother survived the bombardment because of what you did, because humanity refused to surrender." Chen looked at her and saw in her face the same determination he had seen in his crews during the war. "We didn't do it alone," he said quietly. "We did it because the galaxy was ready for change. We just had to show them it was possible." The woman saluted and left him alone among the lights. Chun stayed until full darkness fell and the memorial field blazed like a galaxy made of stars, each one representing a life lost, a story ended, a future stolen, but also representing something else, the price of the freedom that came after, the price humanity had paid and the galaxy had witnessed. And in the Grand Assembly Chamber on Nexus Prime, where beings from 1,000 worlds argued about the future. A human delegation proposed a new law. No species could ever again authorize a purification action under any circumstances. The vote was not unanimous. Some species abstained. A few voted against it, clinging to old ideas about hierarchy and necessary evils. But the law passed by a wide margin. It was imperfect. The new galaxy was imperfect. The Galactic Assembly was inefficient and contentious and frequently frustrating, but it was fair. And for the first time in 180,000 cycles, that was enough.